Hi everybody, my name is Chanastuldey and I am so excited to meet David because I hear so much about him in the Benzo groups, and here he is, he's a real person. So David, I'm going to hand it over to you for a few minutes just to start us off.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this event, and I'm very pleased to be able to do this. I just wanted to fill you in with a little bit about Chanastuldey's biography. In the early 1980s, Chana suffered 3 violent attacks in the UK. Now, it's not that a bad place, really, but there we are. And 10 years of she suffered for 10 years of what is now called PTSD. She recovered and spent the next 25 years combining an Academy Award-winning career in Hollywood with coaching and counseling people with mental health issues. It's because they got paid too much, probably. After graduating from the One Thought Institute in 2018, she noticed that her 2 decades of chronic pain had completely gone, and so conducted research to discover if she could reproduce this experience in others. Following the success of 5 case studies, she developed a program called Painless, and is now helping clients all over the world with all kinds of physical and mental health issues, and to introduce them to the mind-body connection. Chana is an international speaker, coach, and author. She has written 3 novels, The Myth of Low Self-Esteem, Painless, and Very Well. And I think Very Well was an Amazon bestseller. Her latest book is called Beyond Diagnosis, and it's a critique of traditional psychology with over 40 international stories of recovery from every kind of mental health issue as a result of an understanding that we can never be broken and don't need fixing. Sounds like most of you on the group. Chana has diplomas in psychology and pharmacology, is a World Health Organization first responder, and certified life coach. Welcome, Chana, and welcome everybody else.
Yeah, thank you, David. So my name is actually pronounced Hannah. So if anybody's wondering, it's Hannah works just fine. So thank you for that, David.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little introduction, talk a little bit about the work I do and how I think it can help this group. And then we can open up for questions. I love questions. So if you want to ask me questions, you know, that's going to be great. And I know for some people it can be a little bit much being on the camera. You know, if you need to switch your cameras off, you know, if it gets too much or you want to come on it and go off, that's totally fine. I completely understand. So feel free to do whatever makes you feel comfortable. So I wanted to start with talking about listening, because what I'm going to be suggesting and probably pointing to might be a little bit different than what a lot of people in traditional therapy and traditional support groups are used to hearing. So one of the things that really helped me was to learn a little bit about listening with an open mind, should we say. So I've been coaching people, like David said, for probably over 30 years now. Coaching, counseling, it's all the same thing. It's a transformative conversation. That's what we're looking for. And I thought I was a good listener, but when I discovered the ideas that I'm going to share with you, my teacher, I did a 6-month training course, this One Thought Institute, and we spent a whole weekend on listening. And I thought, yeah, I know how to listen. I'm a coach. I can listen really well. But then he started explaining what listening really is. You see, if we listen with a busy mind, we're not really going to hear anything new. So as we went through this weekend session, we were paired up with different people. And my first partner was a psychologist from a UK university. She was not a professor, but she was a psychologist for the students. So she had to speak for 5 minutes and I had to listen for 5 minutes. And I wasn't even allowed to say a question or move my arms or anything. It was so painful, right? Because she was talking about some really interesting things about how she works with her students and some interesting books she's been reading. And I'm like, I was dying to say something, dying to ask. And it was such a good experience because I started seeing just how busy my mind was, how I was up in my head thinking about what she was saying, thinking about questions I wanted to ask her. So I wasn't really listening. Now, the next person I was partnered with was a rabbi, and he was talking about some really interesting things. And I was like, my mind was slowing down a little bit, but I still was like, wanting to, butt in and ask things. And then the third person that I was paired with at the end of the weekend was an older gentleman. He was actually a doctor. He was retired. He was like an English country doctor. You can imagine him with his corduroy jacket on, with the leather patches on the sleeves, very much a gentleman. And he chose to talk about the London Underground for 5 minutes. And at first I was like, oh my God. But I can tell you, I was absolutely fascinated by everything he said. He talked about having one ticket that would take him from his hotel to the conference center to see his daughter. And I was like, really? And it's not that I'm particularly interested in the London Underground system, although it is very interesting. It's because my mind slowed down. And that's what I'm suggesting and offering to you. When our minds slow down, we can take in new information, we can listen more clearly. And so that's what I wanted to start with, was just offering that when we get up in our heads, as we all do, we're less able to take in new information. So that's what I wanted to start with. So as David said in my introduction, I have not been on benzodiazepines and I'm not a doctor. So everything I'm going to share with you is more coming from the idea of the mind-body connection. That's what I've written books about and what people ask me to talk about. Because whatever your situation, we are going to be using our mind and our thoughts and our consciousness to understand everything that happens to us. So one of my teachers, his name's Dr. Bill Pettit, he's a psychiatrist with over 50 years of experience, both in clinical practice and institutions and private practice. I've done a lot of courses with him, so I've learned a lot about this. And one of the analogies he gave me, I thought would be useful to share with you tonight. I actually wrote about this in the group, or one of the other groups that Rosalind runs, about a week ago, and I thought it'd be interesting to explore it a little bit. So Dr. Bill explained to me that when people show up at their doctor's office looking for help with anxiety, with depression, with all kinds of mental health diagnoses, their minds are usually going way too fast, like 100 miles an hour. That's how we've thought ourselves into some very difficult situations. Now, whether it's coming from an experience like trauma or grief, or maybe a divorce, or losing a job, losing a partner, a beloved pet, whatever the situation, we can all get into some thought-created, difficult, sort of dark places. And so many of us go to the doctor either asking for help, or we show up with maybe a physical issue, and the doctor offers us help with our mental well-being. And we end up on these drugs, these psychiatric medications. So the way Bill explained it to me, and this is just a metaphor, he said, like, if your mind is going 100 miles an hour, it's like you're driving a car with your foot on the accelerator, and the accelerator is full down, going 100 miles an hour, right? Now, taking the medication is kind of like putting the brakes on. Whatever the medication is, whether it's an antidepressant or benzos or all kinds of psychotropics, all of these medications, whether it's marijuana, some people use food and alcohol, whatever it is we're doing, it's like we're putting the brakes on so that we're trying to make that thinking tolerable. And that's really what medication does. It's almost like being intoxicated, a different version than alcohol, but it's actually like putting the brakes on the speed and the intensity of that thinking. Now, you can drive a car with one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator, right? It is possible to drive like that, but it's not the best way to drive a car. And, sooner or later, it's going to become a problem. So now people do live on these kind of medications for many, many years. I've worked with people who've been on, benzodiazepines for 20 years and more. So for whatever reason, when it's time to come off, whether that's something you've come to or your doctors suggested it or your family members or, have kind of suggested it's time, what happens is you're taking your foot off the brake, but this foot is still on the accelerator. That's the problem. So if we don't understand what's happening, we're going to crash and burn. And this is what I want to talk to you about. So when I work with people who are actively detoxing, and I know most of the people in this group have already gone through the detox, but when I'm working with someone who's detoxing, I want to help them take their foot off the accelerator as well. So how do we do that? So this is really what I want to share with you. My experience was PTSD. That's how I came to, start understanding the mind-body connection and mental health and mental diagnosis. What was happening is that I had gone up into my mind and I was living and reliving my anxious thinking all day long. Now, I actually, after I got well, I trained as a first responder. I trained as a trauma counselor who's trained actually to go to situations like, say, God forbid, you've been in a car accident or, there's been a fatality, something like that. We are trained to go to the situation and help stabilize people at the scene. So when I was learning this, one of my teachers, he explained how the fight or flight response, and you guys probably know all this stuff, but I'm just going to go over some of the basics. The fight or flight response is designed to last for about 20 minutes. Now, I'm sitting in a class and I'm listening to this, and he explained that, if you've been in a car accident or your house is on fire, something terrible like that, or even like bad news that you've just been, heard something terrible, the fight or flight response goes into action for 20 minutes. And then it takes 72 hours for all that adrenaline and cortisol and glucose to disappear out of your body so that in 72 hours you can face another emergency. That's how we were designed. This is the wisdom of our system. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, yeah, but my clients aren't sitting in stress for 20 minutes. They're sitting in stress for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6, 8, 10, 18 hours a day. And I've had clients who, when I explain this to them, they'll say, yeah, I've been feeling like that since I was 10 years old, constantly living in stress and anxiety. And that's how they ended up at the doctor and wanting or needing taking these medications. So I started to learn and understand how this anxiety that our bodies weren't designed to sustain is actually now causing a lot of dysregulation in the body and in the brain. So one of the myths that has been around for a long time in psychology is that we have a chemical imbalance. People who have a mental health diagnosis have a chemical imbalance. And I have to tell you that it's not true. Now, that's not just me with my opinions, although I have plenty, right? But there are plenty, oh, here's someone else joining us. There are top psychiatrists from the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration in America, and the NIMH, which is the National Institutes of Mental Health, which is a government body in the United States. Psychiatrists from these top organizations are now admitting that it was never true. So how did this happen? How did it come to be that we are told that we have something wrong with our brains and that's why we're anxious, that's why we're in depression? So as I've studied the history of psychology and psychiatry and the history of antidepressant medications, what I started to see was that most of the medications that are continuing to be prescribed today actually started out as remedies for other conditions like Parkinson's, like rheumatism, dementia. And then they noticed that these medications had side effects, which were calming or I could say numbing, right? And because, you know, pharmacological research costs a lot of money, they wanted to get the most for the money that they'd spent on all this research. So they thought, let's see if we can use it for other things. Let's give it to some depressed people and see if we can help them. And so they do some research, and they don't really know how these things work. As you've probably all discovered, your doctors don't really know, how these medications work in the brain and how they're helping or not helping. And the research then shows that there's a slight improvement. And then the pharmaceutical companies now need to sell these drugs. And it was kind of shocking to me when I found out that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in America, only needs 2 research programs to prove that the medication is working in order to be sold. Now, they may have 20 research programs that didn't work, that may have even caused harm, but they're not going to let you know about that because they met the 2 requirements, and that is all they need to start selling the drugs. Now, what does it mean that a drug works? So this also I found fascinating. It only has to work slightly better than a placebo. Now, they use something called the Hamilton scale to judge whether someone is improving on a medication or a therapy. And on the Hamilton scale, you could get that same improvement from a good night's sleep. That's how little better they are than a placebo. So I don't know if you guys find this interesting. I find it fascinating, right? The way they do research is with a control group and an active group. Now, if you know anything about psychiatric medications, we know that they have side effects. Weight gain, sexual problems, dizziness, headaches. There's even anxiety, which is kind of weird that you're getting an anxiety medication and one of the side effects is anxiety. And so if you're in a group where you're not getting any side effects, you know that you're not in the active group. And if you're getting side effects, you know that you're in the active group. That is going to change your state of mind. So even in the group that are getting the medication, there's also a placebo effect, right? So the actual benefit of the medication gets smaller and smaller. And at best, as you guys, I'm sure you know, the best that it does is blunts feelings. It's not curing anything. And the doctors know that. It's not curing anything. It's just numbing you out. So when you start to see this and understand this, then understanding how the mind works is the only way that you're going to feel better. So this is what I share with my clients. We are always feeling our thinking. So if you go back to that time before when you first went to the doctor's office to get the medication or were given it, and you were arriving with your mind going 100 miles an hour, you were feeling the stress of that very busy, fast thinking. Now, what if you had been told right then that you didn't have to listen to that thinking? What if you knew that every thought you've ever had is passing through? So here's another analogy. Thoughts are like clouds. They're like trains. Trains going in and out of the station, clouds going through the sky. They're constantly moving. Every thought you've ever had is moving through. Now, people always say to me, oh yeah, but you don't understand, my thinking gets stuck. I say, yeah, it feels like it's stuck. It feels like it's overwhelming. It feels like it's never going to end. But that is the feeling of the speeded up thinking. Anxiety is really just speeded up very, very fast thinking. So I didn't even realize how anxious I was back when I was experiencing PTSD. I didn't even have a label for it. It was in the early 80s, and no, in in the UK, nobody was talking about diagnosis then. It was just have a cup of tea and go home, and that was the treatment I got. Right? But I know now that I was living in the feeling of this very, very anxious thinking. I was up in my head the whole time. So what I've learned is we are not our thoughts. We are not our diagnosis. We are the observer of those thoughts. We are the thinker of those thoughts. And when you can step back and watch those thoughts go through, then you don't have to be a victim of them. Now, I still get weird and wonderful thoughts. I can get an inappropriate thought, even a criminal thought, right? It can still happen. I can get a sad, depressing kind of thought. And I've learned that I don't have to listen to it, that's freedom. I don't have to blot it out. I don't have to reframe it, change it, because I know it's going to move on. Every thought we've ever had, every heartbreak, every panic attack, every inspiration has moved on. And when you know that your thinking is always moving, you start to see that it's not you. And if it's not you, then you don't have to take it personally. You don't have to react to it. It's almost like having like a talk radio station in the background. It's just going on, and the radio doesn't need me to listen in order for it to keep going. It's just going to keep going. They say we have about 80 or 90,000 thoughts a day. And for people like us, we probably have a lot more, right? So what I found is by understanding this, my thinking has started to slow down. That means I don't experience anxiety anymore. And I'm able to come back to the moment where I know I'm safe. Now, I know people who are going through a protracted benzo withdrawal have a slightly different experience where the anxiety is kind of also there in the background all the time. And I don't know if that's going to go away or not. I hope for your sakes it does. I hope that when you slow down and you start to understand this, that might be possible. I mean, we can always pray for a miracle. But whatever your level of anxiety is, we can learn to have a better life with it. It is possible. I've had clients who've experienced that both with chemical anxiety, with stress anxiety, with all kinds of anxiety, that there can be a place where we can come to have a better life with it. So I've been talking for quite a bit now. Like I said, I love to answer questions. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm so happy to keep talking or explain more. So I'm going to just open it up now for you guys and see if anybody wants to share anything or ask anything. Let's see. Anybody?
They're shy a lot. Oh.
Is it? Yeah, they're shy. Who's that?
I'm Arnett, I'm really what you're saying is can you hear me? I'm looking at a screen at my monitor, but my actual laptop with my camera and speakers in a different place. So I'll lean over and try to do that. But it's resonating with me. My current integrative doctor has me sit down with him and listen to him. And he'll say, don't write it down. I mean, we're just focusing, he's really emphasizing that. Just look at me, listen to what I'm saying as you're saying. And it's amazing, as you pointed out, how many things you have to shut off to do that. And I'm trying to practice that. He also recommended a book to me that has been very helpful, and I will try to plug it. But it has to do with quieting your mind and looking at these thoughts as you're hosting a cocktail party, and everybody's getting drunker and louder and drunker and louder. And the cocktail party.
It's very hard to hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, your brain is hosting a cocktail party, and these thoughts are the guests, and they're getting drunker and louder and drunker and louder. And finally, you have to ask those guests to leave, or you move away from them. But that analogy of the loudness and the obnoxiousness and all that is very helpful to me as well, because before I was just letting them all hang around. And so anyway, so what you're saying is resonating with me. It is, I think, it is hard for those of us in protracted, because we may have contributing issues because our bodies stopped detoxing and everything. So we may have some other things going on that are still creating this turmoil, and we don't know how to address those things because we don't know what's really real and that we need to address, and what is just one of these drunks running around in our brains. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you said. And you're right. That's such a great analogy, that there's like what do you say, like a drunken party going in your
Yes.
head. That was a great analogy. I mean, I would even take it a little bit further. Because those thoughts that seem like they're misbehaving, remember they're moving on. Like, so I would take the analogy even further. Like, for example, I like the analogy of trains. Like, think of your brain like a train station, like it's Grand Central Station in there. And there are trains coming from all over the country, and they're going through, and it's very noisy and very loud and very busy, even like dirty and grimy. So a lot of the techniques that we get taught in like therapy and psychology, it's addressing the content of the thinking, like those what the drunks are talking about. And what I find, that's kind of like dragging the train back into the station so you can work out how to make it leave. Well, it already left. Every thought you've ever had has left. So there actually is nothing to do. That was the huge relief for me when I started to understand this. Because I had spent, I don't know, 20, 30 years, becoming an expert in thought hygiene and what do I do? The Enneagram and A Course in Miracles. And I lived in Southern California for a long time. And there was plenty of tools and techniques and things to, like gurus to listen to and silent retreats to go on. And then we're doing yoga and Pilates. I was so busy trying to fix my thinking. And then when I discovered I don't actually have to do anything because it's always moving, that's going to add another layer of peace to your experience. And you're right, what you were talking about, with people with protracted withdrawal, there's quite possibly a chemical element to this. But I'm thinking, even if, like you said, like we don't know which part is the chemical and which part is, the kind of stress-induced anxiety, would it make a difference if we knew which part was which? Because you're still going to be experiencing it with your mind and your thinking anyway. I'm just putting that out there. It's just something that just occurred to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, an example for me is, I have some possible environmental impacts, like, say my amalgams and things like that, and trying to distinguish, well, is that really a problem, or an exposure to mold? Is that really a problem? Or, should I keep looking for mold in my house? They're saying I have the same symptoms. And so sometimes it can be difficult to sort through how much do I need to pursue that may be environmental. This is just an example, that environmental issue, and how much of it is just, I've got this stuff going on.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've been looking into the mind-body connection for almost a decade now, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but certain things go in and out of fashion. Like if you take your mind back to the 1980s, in the 1980s, businessmen had stomach ulcers. Remember, we kept hearing about businessmen having stomach ulcers. Like that's like the guys on Wall Street, they all had stomach ulcers. And then in the 90s, everybody had carpal tunnel, right? Right? I can't remember the last time I heard someone talk about carpal tunnel, but in the 90s, everybody had carpal tunnel. And then everybody was OCD. And then everybody was ADHD. And now everybody else is narcissistic, right? I find it entertaining. Like there's certain labels that we'll put on ourselves. I like, oh, I'm being so OCD today, but she's narcissistic. So things go in and out of fashion. And I noticed that right now, I mean, I've helped a lot of people with histamine intolerance and, food intolerances. And I've met people who like their food can get down to just 2 or 3 things. It's like their body is reacting so much to whether it's mold or histamine or certain foods. And I want to suggest that this is a result of a very hyper overreactive nervous system. So when I'm going to just detour a little bit for now to hormones to explain this. So for the book that Katie had hold it up, this book here, it's called Very Well. This is, yeah, this is my 3rd book, and most of my books are novels, they're stories, because I found that people, we've all read enough textbooks and enough self-help books. These ones are stories, and so the characters do the suffering and the falling down and the the searching and the getting up and the happy endings. So this one's about hormones. And I'm just going to sidetrack onto hormones for a moment, because I found this very, very interesting piece of research. So there's a diagnosis called PMDD, which means premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's where women who in their monthly cycle are having such a tough time, they're almost suicidal, right? And so the researcher that I discovered, she had a group of women with this PMDD who are absolutely suicidal every month, and then a group of women who are, going through their lives quite fine, healthy. And she tested their hormone levels. And I'm going to tell a very short version of this, but I want to tell you that their hormone levels were exactly the same, right? Which was really surprising, because if these women are suicidal because of their monthly cycle, and these women are doing okay on their monthly cycle, what's going on here? So being a good researcher, she went back to each group and she started asking more questions. And she discovered that the group of women with PMDD diagnosis, who were suicidal, all had a history of either abuse, trauma, or some kind of prolonged stressful thinking. She then went into postpartum depression and menopause, and talked about women who have difficulties with those things also have a history of trauma, abuse, and prolonged stressful thinking. Now, I'm postmenopausal now. I just had my 60th birthday last week. And I had a terrible time with menopause. I mean, I was like the brain fog. I could start a sentence and I didn't even know how I was going to finish it. I couldn't find thoughts in my head. The hot flushes all day and all night. I couldn't sleep. I was not functioning. And then when I discovered these ideas that I'm sharing with you about how the mind works, my menopause symptoms went away because my nervous system calmed down. I have now worked with people with incredible food intolerances, mold intolerance, mast cell activation, histamine, chronic pain, you name it. I've worked with all kinds of people. And when their nervous system calms down, they start to live better, more peaceful lives. Now, it may be true that there's some chemical damage for people who are coming off benzos. But if you think about it, let's say there is, I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say the percentage of chemical damage is, say, 20%, then the other 80% of stress is coming from our thinking. And that we can help you with, right? because I walked around with all kinds of stories in my head about how my body's damaged, and I'm going to get paralyzed, and I'm never going to be able to, walk again, and all these terrible things. And I was feeling the heaviness of those stories. So if, let's say you've got some damage, and then you have stories about, it's not fair, how could the doctors have done this to me? Why didn't they tell me what was going to happen? The chemical, the pharmaceutical companies should be sued. You're walking around with all those stories, your nervous system is going to suffer. And then you're going to have problems with allergies, and you're going to have problems with digestion, fertility. It goes on and on, migraines, skin problems. I had all of those things, and they've all gone away. I had 20 years of IBS gone. I had skin problems, chronic allergies, and it's all gone because my nervous system calmed down. So that's really the message I wanted to share with you guys tonight, is that there is hope. There is hope that no matter what you've been through, no matter what, if there is damage, we can look at the other stuff and see that you can get free of the other stuff. I've got a colleague actually, with like the worst kind of MS, where he's in a wheelchair and he can barely function or move, and he's doing okay. How could that be, right? Everybody thinks that their situation is the worst or different, or nobody understands. And I know people who've gone through the most horrendous situations, and they've come out the other side and they're doing okay, even with disability. So that's what I wanted to share. Does anybody else have any questions, or want to share something? Or I'd love to.
I have a question.
Please, yeah.
Hi.
Zoom.
I joined a little late. I apologize. You know how it is with this injury. I'm 3 years off. I was severely polydrugged. There were so many things that just made the perfect storm. Recently, I did have an MRI and a CT scan done of the brain, and I do have atrophy. Do you know of anyone else that has had that? One doctor said that I had early onset dementia, although I have no signs of dementia. I'm actually starting to remember words that I had lost during my taper, because it was I became very debilitated in a wheelchair. I had to be bathed. I had to be put on the toilet. Sorry, kind of a lot of information there, but
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And I'm walking now. I don't need my wheelchair, but I'm still, for the most part, I am still homebound, but I can bathe myself. I can go to the bathroom. I can cook. But then I do have this atrophy. And of course, I've known for a few months now, and I'm alone. I don't really have anyone to, talk about with this, but I feel like very isolated in the situation. Can you shed light on this?
Yeah, and thank you so much for being vulnerable and honest and sharing with us. I my heart goes out to you. I just want to give you a big hug. It's like it's so
I'll take all the hugs I can get.
So like I said, I've worked with a lot of people with all kinds of mind-body connections, and I am kind of new to the benzo world. I mean, I have worked with a few people who are currently detoxing, but this is I'm just kind of desperate to share with you that I think that there are things that can help. And you kind of touched on it right at the end there. You used the word isolated. That isolation, that's what's going to create your experience now. Like whatever, if there is atrophy, if there is, some disability, and it's amazing how already you're, you're gaining back some of your abilities. Well, excuse me. And so, God willing, there'll be more improvements. So we're going to hang on to that, right? So, but isolation is a very heavy thing to live with. That the story of being isolated on our own. And I just want to tell you a quick story. I was where I live. I was taking a class, and I was walking home. It was about a 20-minute walk home, and another lady from the class was also walking home with me. And we both, I live in Israel. I'm in Jerusalem right now. And this lady was American, I'm English. And she was saying to me how, you know, we live so far away from our families. She says, I feel so isolated. I'm just all on my own. And I said, yeah, it can be a little, difficult when you're living on your own. She said, yeah, my husband did it. I'm like, what? Have a husband? Right? I thought she was, like she said, isolated. I thought she was on her own. She said, yes, my husband, he doesn't really understand. He said, and our kids are, I'm like, what? You have kids? You have a house? You have a husband? You have kids at home? Right? I'm going home to an empty house, right?
Same.
Right, she said, my kids are growing up without their cousins. She said, my husband's sister lives in another town here, but they're not really there. And I'm like, you've got a sister-in-law who's also got kids here, 20 minutes drive away. I started to realize she felt isolated because her mother's not here, right? So can you see, she was living in the feeling. That's what we were talking about before you came. She was living in the feeling of isolation, even though she's surrounded by family. And yet I live on my own. I'm single. I have 2 cats now, which are great. But most of the time I'm quite okay with it. I would certainly love to have a partner, but we're living in the feeling of our thinking. I know people who can be in the middle of a party with their favorite best people and feel alone, and there are other people who can live up a mountain and they're just fine, right? So what I would suggest is just become aware of what thoughts you're listening to, because if anybody starts listening to thoughts of like, it's not fair, I'm all on my own, look, I'm not making it up, there's no one else here, I don't care if I have a cat, and I don't care that my friends came over yesterday, right? Can you hear this? We're going downhill with our mood. And as the mood goes further and further down, all of that thinking, which normally wouldn't bother you, is now going to look very real. And it's going to look like it's a disaster. And that's how people get, I was saying at the beginning, that's how we probably ended up in the doctor's office in the first place, because we'd gotten into some prolonged stressful thinking. And then we're feeling the heaviness, the intensity, the urgency of that thinking. And now we're filling our bodies with adrenaline and cortisol. And look, my hands are shaking. It must be true. And we've thought ourselves into this mess. Now, please don't hear this as judgment or guilt or shoulds or anything like that. We are innocently creating our thought experience. I had PTSD really for probably 10 years. Just the sound of footsteps behind me would set me into a panic. And it could be just some kid running for a school bus. And I'd be like, because of what happened to me. And that's gone away now because I've learned not to listen to that thinking. All right. So whatever is physiologically happening with you, I'm so sorry. But it seems like you are getting better. And this is something else you made me think of. I had some serious head injuries. I was attacked 3 times when I was living in the UK. And one of them was a skull fracture right here. I can put my finger on it. I know you can't see it, but I know I can feel exactly where the bone knitted back together again. And I lost my eyesight. Thank God it was temporary because my brain was damaged that I couldn't see for a while. And so it just was my train of thought. What was I saying? My brain damage. What was I saying?
Oh, you said that about physiological changes, but
see, you're doing better. Oh, I'm right. Thank you. See, It came back. I knew if I don't panic, it always comes back. Right? See, actually, this is so funny because this is exactly what I was trying to say. So my teacher, who's a psychiatrist with 50 years of experience, I asked him, I said, because when I was going through menopause and my brain fog was just so terrible. I mean, it wasn't just things like finding mayonnaise in the freezer. I mean, that's kind of funny. I couldn't find words in my brain. It was like, I felt that disabled. And I was terrified I was getting dementia or I was losing my mind. And so I asked my teacher, the psychiatrist, I said, is my brain injury meaning that I'm going to get dementia and I'm going to, start losing my memory? And he said, I really can't tell you, because without looking at an MRI, I can't tell you just by, talking with you. He said, but I can tell you that when we get stressed, our memory capacity decreases. And if you think about that in terms of losing your keys, right? You want to leave the house, you can't find your keys. Oh my gosh, where are my keys? I've got to pick up the kids. I'm going to be late. And the more we panic trying to remember where the keys are, we can't find them. And then when you calm down, they're right there in front of you. But in the panic, I couldn't see them. I couldn't remember that I put them on the hook in the hallway, like where I normally do. But we're running around in a tizzy, and our memory doesn't function so well. And that's true for everybody, not just people with brain damage or the things that we've been through. So again, it's like the more we can help our nervous system calm down, the more we can have a quieter mind, you are going to do so much better. And who knows, it might keep improving, all the physiological stuff as well. So
yes, and I can back up what you just said, because I was in tolerance for years, because the doctor, I was being physically abused, and I had been hit very hard in the head. I was 19 or 20. And the doctor, that's when I was put on Benzo and Prozac. And I had no idea. I was always very gullible, kind of naive to things, and I never ever questioned it. But the doctor said, oh no, you're depressed and you're this, because I was crying, which is a normal response to being beat up, right?
Yes.
But then I was labeled this, and for years I thought I was depressed and whatever, and I was just medicated. Then I was like, wait, something's wrong. But by this time I was already in my 50s.
Right.
Because I just realized what was happening in 2019, and found a doctor that would taper me, and started tapering in 2020, and here I am. But what you're saying about thoughts, because I was already debilitated and a wheelchair off and on then. So I was pretty bad. And but when I can see that I was really going downhill fast, as soon as I started to taper very slowly, I made signs in my room with just paper. Smile, you got this. I love you. To myself, I love you. You're gonna be okay. And had I not kept with that positive mindset, God only knows, because I also got suicidal ideation, which was so bizarre, because I was like, this is not me. And I had to be really strong in my mind, because who knows? And I just kept telling myself, that's a lie. That's not real. Those thoughts that are happening.
Right.
And in terms of the, it's not happening. This is not who you are. It's going to get better.
Oh, yes.
And in terms of living alone, I do have kids, but none talk to me. They think I'm doing this, not doing this. They think what I'm doing is doing it on purpose for attention. And I can't get them to understand or realize it. And finally, the three, they talked and just stopped talking to me, which is beyond bizarre.
Sorry.
But I've had to let that go, because I can't live in that space.
Right.
And now I just talk to myself at home.
Right.
I can just keep going.
Better conversations.
Yes.
But I'm so proud of you. I mean, I work with a lot of people with anxiety, all different kinds of, labels of anxiety. And my clients are the bravest people in the world. They keep showing up, even though, your head is screaming at you to, the thing, it's a disaster. It's, you're going to make a mistake of doing it wrong, whatever the topic is, and what I've learned is and you touched on something I just wanted to say also, this idea of diagnosis. I have a colleague, Dr. Judy Sedgman, and she gave me the best definition of diagnosis I ever heard. She said, a diagnosis is like, imagine it's your worst day ever. You've been home with the flu, right? You've got a pimple on the end of your nose. You've got bad hair day, right? Someone else got that promotion at work because you were out sick. Someone swiped your car and left a big scratch and didn't leave a note. You're like, right? And someone comes along and takes your photograph and says, this is going to be your ID photograph for the rest of your life. And you're like, no, it was just that one day I was having such a bad day. They go, no, this is your photograph for the rest of your life. So people often get given a diagnosis, and it may have said where they were at that moment, but it's not who you are. You are not your diagnosis. You are not what's happened to you. You're not even your thinking. Underneath all of that, everybody has innate well-being. Everybody has innate mental health. It's just that when we didn't know and we didn't understand and we innocently got confused and, gullible and naive, whatever words we want to use, and the doctors came along and gave us this stuff. I say us, I'm talking about you guys. It's like, I'm just trying to think of an analogy. It's like, okay, so I have a couple of candlesticks here on my mantelpiece. Imagine you had your grandmother's silver candlesticks, and they get all schmutzy and they get covered in dust and wax, and they get like dull. You don't go and buy new candlesticks. If you clean them, the silver is still there, right?
Yes.
Underneath your suffering, the disability, everything you've been through, the silver is still there. Or another way of saying that is like the weather. We all can have thought storms, right? And we can all get caught up in our thinking, have a panic attack, whatever, and it's like, where I live up on top of a mountain, and in the winter here we can have really bad winters, and it can get dark at 3 p.m. There can be gale force winds and snow and hail and sleet. But thank God I went to school and I had some good teachers, and they taught me that weather always, right? It's going to pass. Now, when a storm passes, the blue sky is always there. We don't have to go to Amazon and order blue sky, right? It's always there. You are the blue sky. No matter what's happened to you, whatever you've been through, you are the blue sky. And no one can take that away from you. You can never be broken. Our bodies might get damaged for sure. I've had plenty of broken bones. I've had plenty of infections and things happening. But the me that's deep inside, whether you call that spirit or soul, it doesn't really matter what you call it, that can never be broken. That's your innate well-being. And it's always there, and it always will be there underneath all the pain, all the disability, all the anxiousness, all that stinky thinking. Because remember, that's always move on, and we can come back to this moment, whatever that is for you, and you can actually live a better life when you understand this. So I'm really excited for you, because it sounds like you are on a path of recovery, and I would just encourage you to keep looking for the good feelings. Keep looking for that blue sky, because it is there.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you came tonight. Now, we only have a couple of minutes left. David, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say, or any questions. What do you think? How are we doing, do you think?
Oh, fine. Yes. No, I from being on the group a lot, and obviously helping people with emails and things like this, you certainly got to the center of our universe, and and it's very helpful. In your opening, you talked about listening, and I remember a wise teacher once said, "We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and therefore we should listen twice as much as we speak."
Yes, absolutely. Yes, very true. So, if you don't mind, I just want to tell people, if you have any more questions, you want to reach out to me. I'm so happy I'm available. I can answer short questions by an email, or if you're looking for coaching or anything like that. I just want to plug my new book. This, if you can see this, it's called Beyond Diagnosis. Oh, yay! Look, David has one. Right? And the first part of the book, it's really a textbook. The other books are novels. This one is more of a textbook. And the first part of the book is a critique of psychology and psychiatry. Like, they've got it wrong. You know, there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. And, you know, I really, I was told to, like, be careful. There's some stuff I really wanted to say about doctors, like, you know, what you guys have shared with me, but I had to be careful of what I could say. The main part of the book is personal stories of, there's over 60 stories in here of people who've recovered from every kind of mental health diagnosis you can think of, from schizophrenia and psychosis to bulimia to OCD, ADHD, even autism. You know, the doctors will tell you that you're, you know, that you're sick and it's genetics and you're going to have to be on this meds for the rest of your life. It's not true. This book is a detailed description of how people have gotten well. And I've also interviewed good therapists and good psychiatrists who are, one's a professional describer. She works for the NHS in the UK, and she's just been made a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And she's in here teaching people how to come off medication. She's amazing. And a lot of other people who are outside of the traditional model of psychology, who are really, we're all trying to do our best to help people like you who've been through hell and have suffered, but we want to share hope, you know, that you have resilience. It is there. We just need to look underneath the stinky thinking, and you will find it. So my books are on Amazon. I'm probably going to post this, if Rosalind is okay, I'll post the recording in the group so other people can listen, and I'll put my contact information. I have a membership group. I have a YouTube channel where there's lots more of this information available. So, and you can find me on Facebook. So I think we're almost out of time. I am so honored. It was such a privilege, David, to you know, be to come to your group and to speak to everybody. I really appreciate everybody who showed up and your questions. And like I said, if you have more and you want to reach out, please do. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. All right. So I'm wishing you all the best. Be well. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.